So thank you everybody for attending this session. I think we've got some new faces today. Some of you who weren't able to attend the initial introduction session. So if you haven't been able to review what was said before, you can go on our website, go to the blog, and we've kind of summarized what was there. If you'd like the link to the recording of those sessions and you don't have it, ping me, let me know, and I will make sure that you have that link. So today what we're going to do is just quickly review what we've done so far as a group, and then have a brief discussion about the focus of today's session, where we want to focus in the breakout group discussions afterwards. We'll then have a little time to report back to the group and have a wider discussion before discussing next steps. So with that, just to recap what we've done so far. So we originally last month, we grouped to discuss what the scope of COMET was, introduce kind of the overall concept, what the timeline of activity is, what's in scope, what's out of scope. And then we, as a group, collaborated on, within the sessions and after the sessions, on the vision statement, which the conveners then finalized and circulated. You'll be able to find that on the website too if you haven't read that already. And then Adam created this wonderful read ahead around product development, outlining what the current thinking is around product development. We circulated that and got lots of great comments from many of you. So thank you if you engage with that document for the proposed model. So all of those great comments have helped to inform how we're thinking about this session as well. So with that, I'll hand over to Adam.
Sorry, my computer is being mildly unhelpful. Yeah, so today's task is to kind of engage a little bit further with our product read ahead. So specifically, what we want to do is kind of discover all of the product aspects that we need to kind of address as we kind of further develop this model to inform our kind of overall call to action. But our primary focus here is kind of to go through the questions related to kind of this product development process and discover more about kind of community interests and concerns. I say this because we're not really trying to, we have a lot of questions. Anyone who's engaged with the product development read ahead can see, there's a big list, there's lots of comments. There's no way in having 15-minute breakout groups and group discussion that we're going to be able to get through all of those. But what we can do is kind of surface and clarify additional questions, each other's thoughts, see where there might be gaps and kind of capture that to inform the next steps in our process. Can you pull up next slide? So we have some categories that were kind of described in the read ahead. If I'm going to throw the link in the chat right now, in case this is your first time engaging with it. 1 second. So these are kind of focused on various kind of aspects that we think the proposed product model will have to incorporate. So things like source integrations, where is this data going to come from? Ingestion and validation, how are we going to kind of take care of that source data and turn it into something rational and usable? Overall processing of the data. So what needs to be done to do things like deduplicate it, reconcile it with various sources. Evaluation, so everything that is submitted might not be of good quality, of complete, have sufficient kind of data to be processed. So we have to do that level of evaluation. How to kind of manage things in the context of this proposed model. If we identify kind of errors or issues with those preceding steps, how do we reconcile and resolve those? And distribution. So if we assume we can do a kind of round trip and produce this actual data relative to source enrichments, how do we resolve those issues? And then impact. So if we're doing all this work, we want this proposed model to be successful. How do we make it have the most impact? There's lots of other kind of discussions that have happened in the comments, and I don't want to preclude those kind of arising as well. So this is just kind of an overview to provide context for people as we go into those breakout rooms. Next slide, please. Yeah, so with that, we're kind of gonna, I think, move into the breakout rooms. Is there one more slide? Yeah, so we have a little bit of a discussion guide to kind of frame how we want to engage with folks. I think John was going to handle this section.
Yeah, so as Claire and Adam mentioned, the document was circulated and there are a lot of great observations already in the document. But what we thought we would do right now as part of this listening session today, and we'll have another one this afternoon, is to get into smaller groups and review the ideas that are expressed in it and with across the different areas that Adam just outlined in more detail. We're going to take about 15 minutes for this. So there'll be a convener in each of the rooms taking notes as we discuss the document and the ideas that are expressed in it. And we're going to ask for one of the people in each of the rooms to report back at the end, just some of the high-level observations. What we want to make sure that we're doing in these rooms is, as Adam mentioned, is really cataloging as many of the observations and questions that we have as a group. Again, our goal as a larger COMET task force is to look at this problem statement of how to best collaboratively enrich hidden metadata and come up with a scope that we can use as a call to action so that we can collectively express what we know needs to happen so that any group or any future effort that comes out to address these issues understands us as a community, our needs and our opinions on this matter. So the goal of the sessions today, the breakout sessions, is really for us to collect those observations. So as Adam was mentioning, we don't want to focus too much on the specific, dive too deep into one specific topic. Really, the goal of the next 15 minutes would be for us to catalog as many of those observations from the group as possible and start that discussion about how we can express our opinions around this topic to future collaborators. Okay, any questions at all about anything we've discussed so far? Anything that Claire mentioned about previous work, about the framing, anything from Adam about the read ahead, about the discussions around product, anything about COMET or the way that the initiative is happening? Any? Not? Okay, maybe next slide, Claire. Okay, so when we get into the breakout rooms, we want to make sure that we, just follow standard respectful rules of engagement when we get into these rooms. All of us have had experiences being in Zoom rooms and can understand that it can sometimes go well and sometimes it cannot. So we just wanted to lay out some of the ground rules. We really do want to make sure that we can get all perspectives. So, please make room for others to speak. Also, if you feel like your comment is something that would make more sense to actually be added into the document, please feel free to go into the document and leave comments. The expressing them verbally in these breakout rooms is not the only way to engage. So if that ends up being the best way for you to convey your opinions or your ideas, please feel free to do that as well. We do want to make sure that we focus on the topic at hand. We have several areas that we're focusing on when it comes to the larger COMET initiative. We will be doing governance listening sessions around how of future implementation should be governed and worked through from community members and those types of topics, as well as another discussion about implementation. Like, what does it mean for it to be this type of a workflow, this type of a project to be implemented? Those will be in future sessions. So we want to kind of focus the topic today on the product descriptions that were sent in the read ahead. Also, we don't have any strict confidentiality policies, but we want to follow Chatham House rules and think about, you know, working with the opinions in the room that not necessarily need to be strictly confidential, but we do want to anonymize anything. We want to create a safe zone for anybody who brings any opinions to the table that they don't feel like their opinions will be attributed to them and blogged about and about later. So please have a vibrant discussion, but we want to make sure that the comments and the perspectives that are made are more from a holistic COMET perspective instead of from individuals. And we will make sure that that is the case when we do any future documentation. Any comments or questions about the process? And Claire, do you have? Oh, I see one question. For the notes, each convener has a breakout notes document, and so that will be the person who will be taking notes from the session itself, so they can post that link in the chat once we get into the breakout rooms. But also, if you have any comments or perspectives that you want to put into the actual read ahead document, you can also do that during the breakouts as well. So Adam put that link right there in the chat, so you can go on over and leave notes in that document as well. I have one observation, which is that was too short. Yeah, we were just getting started. There's obviously a lot of observations. Ricardo and I were mid-sentence when we cut over. Yes. Yeah, I mean, we are trying to convene this conversation, bring everybody together, and also, you know, we're very involved in it too. So this is one of the reasons why earlier we were saying, please, if your mind is starting to race with ideas, capture those in either the listening session documents that we just had or directly into the read ahead. We really do want to, and we will grab those observations and build them into our future report. Okay. One thing we thought we would do, I know we don't want to get into too much report out kind of, you know, one-way conversation, but we do want to hear what are some of the unique things that came out of the discussions. So we had 3 rooms. Adam, Juan, and myself were leading those, I think, right? So maybe we could just go around and report out some of the things. Juan, did you wanted to get started?
Yeah, I mean, first, I think we were also really just getting going. We sort of slow rolled, and then
Yeah.
the idea started to sort of waterfall once the first drop started to fall, and we were just getting going. So it's just something to keep in mind. I did encourage everyone to make sure we start capturing those things into the read ahead document now because we're getting into the specifics. So I'll share a couple things beyond that from our group that I think are particularly useful, more really around because the things that are going to be harder to capture within that read ahead document. In particular, there was a lot of there was a suggestion and a lot of agreement in our group around the having use cases as a way of helping to guide and answering what are the questions to be found, that perhaps instead of trying to come up with the questions in the abstract, that it's more around coming up with what are some of the use cases that we can envision going forward as a way. And there was sort of agreement on that, as well as some specific things that came from it, including that one of the other ways of organizing our thoughts around these things might be to think through around what are the kind of different user categories, and thinking around sort of metadata contributors, providers, or harvesters as another way. So not just thinking of the categories that we've laid out as a way of identifying questions, but actually thinking about from the different kind of user perspectives and who are the people that we need to have involved. There's other things that came out from the group and the specifics, and I don't know if you want me to continue around sort of summarizing everything. I certainly can, but I think those are sort of elements that were more around how do we keep how, maybe we can add some places for those kinds of things within the document so people can start throwing in those specific examples, and it might be a way of people to continue to engage and answer questions and identify what the product definition is going to be through a slightly different pathway. Yeah, I can spend another couple minutes on a few more things if you want. I'm not, yeah.
Sure. I mean, we could turn it a little bit into a discussion. I mean, within our breakout group, we did have something similar. We were talking about the fact that many of the prioritized issues that we could see with this type of a model are kind of sitting there right in front of us. There was the use case of, when you're in Latin America and you're looking for things looking for records based on language, there's just incomplete metadata just declaring what the language is. That is something that is just well understood and people know. So there are kind of, it wasn't described as a low-hanging fruit, but there are, those types of there are things that are high priority that are just well understood, and that we could get started there. We don't necessarily need to be searching for all use cases for us to be able to get started on important use cases. So that kind of feeds into some of what you were mentioning, Juan.
Yeah, it came up with our group, and there was some debate as to whether it would be a conversation that is for at this point, or for that is for governance around, for identifying use cases. It's the question around who's in the room and who's able to participate is important already, even regardless of how we do it, but especially around these things, around whose use cases are we going to be building towards. And that it might not be enough to just have people be engaged with a governance question, but rather really around the product definition question is really key. Just what we're trying to do here, but for those questions to be put at the foreground. Specifically, also came up around making sure that whatever gets built needs to have having equitable pathways for participation, as the different groups have greater technical or otherwise capacity to contribute and different kinds of expertise to contribute. So our product needs to really kind of have those equitable pathways to contribute. And so that these kind of questions that feed into as we think about what are those readily available use cases needs to be considered. There was a couple very much more I would say directly more concrete product questions or suggestions. One is around the importance of provenance being key, as well as ways of validating corrections, because and then in particular that these things are important for decision making around downstream uses. That these are the things that people might not, how are people going to be able to decide whether or not they want to incorporate the correction? Whether that be at source, at the original, whoever is the publisher, or whoever generated the data in the first place, or whether it be any other downstream user. So that was one thing. And then the other very concrete thing was around identifying, and there needs to be pathways for what's going to be the pathways for these things to feed back to the original source. Again, whether that be a journal or some other originator of the metadata, but that there are still questions around what will that look like for someone to take in, absorb these corrections. So I think that captures the rest of the things are in the notes, but I think that captures the most salient and things. If anybody else from the group wants to also jump in and offer some of the other things that you heard in our conversation that I haven't highlighted yet, you'd be welcome to do so.
Yeah, feel free to raise your hand in the Zoom if you want to jump into the discussion. Adam, did you have some additional observations from your room?
Yeah, so picking up from the kind of the tail end of Juan's comments there, we had a lot of very kind of process-focused discussions. So we were thinking about kind of enrichments coming in two primary categories, which also inform some of those kind of equity considerations that Juan was raising. So we might have kind of bulk automated sources that are from folks who have kind of large scale systems that are doing enrichment, that have kind of robust technical infrastructure, but we also have to support various forms of manual curation that come in either through an intermediary source or directly into the system. And those kind of require different processing considerations, both from a UI and API perspective, in terms of what needs to be built to kind of allow manual curation, what needs to be built to allow kind of mass ingestion, and then also how those things might be also served up in various other sources that are consuming the data. So one kind of interesting question that was raised kind of around provenance was about the kind of the visibility of the source, meaning where did it come from, and whether or not there should be kind of visibility to an end user about the validation state of a source. So if we think about something that came in kind of en masse, or something that was manually curated but hasn't gone through a process and it's just kind of sitting there pending some kind of automated or manual review, should that be visible to a user? So we can think about a case maybe where someone has submitted a bunch of affiliation corrections, but they haven't been processed by a curator. Should a user be able to see those, that there's kind of pending corrections that might overlap with their kind of the correction that they want to make, or otherwise conflict? And how do you capture that information? So that was very useful. There was also talk of provenance in the context of kind of trust indicators. So we want to make sure that, like we can capture where things are coming from and what was used to produce those sources. And specifically, so we don't kind of enable mass kind of fraud, as we saw in the kind of sneaked reference situation at Crossref, where people were using the metadata essentially to inflate citation counts and stuff like that. So how do we make sure that all of that is captured so that enrichments can be very trusted? And then there was also some interesting discussion about kind of assertions or enrichments that can be made relative to a data source and the completeness that's available in that data source versus the particular enrichment. So for example, someone might say, I have this data source and it says, it can make all these corrections to affiliations, but there might be a signal in that data source that indicates that there's actually other corrections that are available. And how do those get surfaced, and how do those get made visible to the process that's ingesting it? Yeah, let me see. I'm just reading through the notes.
That came up in our discussion as well, is kind of how do you create processes for, not conflicting, but just differing of opinions across different sources.
Yeah, I'll let you talk about your group. So not monopolizing time. We have time for
sure.
Group discussion.
We had a discussion that went in maybe three big buckets of areas. One was really around this idea of how do we know what the how do we know when we're there, when the records are good enough. So this idea of, a threshold of goodness or a minimum viable record, or what are the different ways that we're benchmarking metadata records as a whole. And not just thinking of it as individual enrichment actions, but also thinking about it from a full record perspective. We also did talk, I think earlier, Juan brought up the conversation about just how do we catalog use cases, catalog enrichment ideas, and how far do we have to go before we can get started? What are the kind of the use cases that we can get started with to demonstrate the full pipeline? So, and those are kind of well known to us. They're not hard for us to imagine that there could be, things around affiliations or language that could be great first cases for us to test out this pipeline. And then also that there are another kind of conversation we had was around this idea that the community of people that will be involved are very fragmented. That while we know them, we know the people who are involved in different sources of enriched content or activities, or people who are interested in this idea. We know them, we see them because we are interested in this and we ping them out. They themselves are fragmented, they're not connected necessarily, and when they are, they're not necessarily working on this issue. And so maybe that speaks to the cultural side of a technical implementation. Just how do you bring a bunch of people together around a pipeline when they themselves are fragmented socially or just organizationally? Other observations, I see there's some in the chat from Joe and Howard. Other observations that anybody wants to bring up from their group? Again, we really do, if you have questions or anything that's come up, we want to make sure we're capturing those. So please put them in the notes document or as comments in the read ahead. I have a question to pivot to if we don't have anything else from the breakout groups discussion. I will ask everybody here if they have Zoom controls to use their hands to raise their hand if they, based on what they think of this question, which is, how many of you have severe doubts that the product description that's in this document can happen? Who here thinks, oh my gosh, I have a lot of doubts that this will happen? If you do, raise your hand.
I would ask it also, we could do it in a different way, which
Oh.
is like, share the emoji that you feel
Yeah,
is
share the
most
emoji
captures
of
the feeling you
yeah.
have about the likelihood of success here.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to get at is that we are the conveners here are not in some sort of state of oblivion, right? We understand there's a level of complexity here that makes this feel very daunting. So one of the things that we wanted to think about is what would it take for us to feel more certain that action can happen from any community call? Specifically, maybe rooting this in specific use cases, right? So not conceptually thinking of this as we're trying to get people to build a system that can deal with anything, anytime, and solve all problems, but instead maybe trying to pivot conceptually to a framing in each of our heads where we're thinking about how can a system like this solve a few very important use cases. Not to say that it can't continue to evolve and bring more, but really thinking about, where can we make progress and what would be a system or a tool or a pipeline that could solve those. And so the reason why I bring this up is just to kind of put a new lens on the way that you're looking at the read ahead and the discussions. We really wanted in that read ahead to think about all of the different complexities and ideas that exist in this type of ecosystem, but we also don't want it to become so theoretical that it becomes something where people start to say this at this level of abstraction, it's never going to happen. So we really want people to think about, okay, what is a very important use case that we know we need to solve and or work on, and how do we run that through the pipeline and the product idea so that we can actually see about tangible benefits from specific action. Yeah, I see in chat it's definitely overwhelming. I think a lot of progress can be made, but there's a lot of cost to this as well. It's true. We can go for minimum viable product and build from there. Absolutely. And I think that those are great observations for us to be capturing. Again, the read ahead really did try to segment things into different categories of actions, but we also want to think across the entire workflow, across the whole pipeline. What are some observations as well? What are the challenges of implementing or creating a system or systems that can do the whole end to end?
John, are you looking for a verbal discussion of those questions or just?
If you have verbal comments, sure. Go for it.
I guess this is obviously a kind of a highly complex thing, right? There are many different reasons that metadata might need improving, social or technical. There are many different stakeholders, many places the metadata goes, and each of those multiplies. I think it's definitely possible to achieve some kind of goal, right, where the metadata gets better. But I do feel like in terms of the methodology, finding a really specific use case which follows the line all the way from producer to corrector to incorporating it back somehow. There may be many different workflows depending, like the thing I was trying to write a bit more concisely in the chat was like different publishers use different systems and they can't all use all the metadata. So you could build an amazing thing and actually, oh, turns out they can't use it. So I think maybe putting our energy towards finding concrete people who want to actually be each part of that thing and work through those will give the best chance of not building assumptions. It's just trying to solve too many things at once.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's a little bit of that in the chat as well around like who would benefit most from this, who would actually have the most to gain from working at different pieces of the puzzle. Ricardo, do you have a comment?
Yeah, related to what it says, Lisa and also Joe, related, okay, stakeholder generate evidence, but for whom, I guess it's very important to organize who is the responsibility of, because you say library, a library in USA is completely different than in Chile. Also the roles inside the library are completely different. How are you to identify not the place, but the role or curation, or who is in charge to upload something, or the researcher or the data creator or whatever. There is a lot of documents that try to identify the roles inside the stakeholder. Maybe it could be easier then to create example for them, but not just talk about the stakeholder in the general, but the role inside certain places. Because in that way also, we don't fight a lot with the research stuff. Because if we try to classify them in the big picture, yeah, there is a big difference in research. But we try to see where there's more action. Maybe it's easier to change stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And knowing those roles, knowing who those people are, those types of roles are, and getting much deeper than kind of the high level stakeholder groups. Yeah, I think is absolutely essential.
Yeah, and synthesizing what Ricardo and Joe were saying a little bit is that there can be different use cases with different levels of stakeholder investment. So at an institutional or regional kind of perspective, there might be a kind of interest in correcting metadata for a university, for a country, for a region. And that might be focused on specific things that influence their kind of monitoring or reporting workflows. So they might be very invested in that. Whereas there might be people who are doing larger scale bibliometric analysis who want, as many complete affiliations as possible across all of the works that exist in Crossref. And they might have an investment in doing that. Those things might be in conflict sometimes because what they think of as good summary affiliation kind of data might be in conflict with curated data that's needed at a regional level, maybe in terms of, for example, language of affiliations. So yeah, I think that it's just it's interesting to figure out how to align use cases with levels of investment.
Okay. Other comments? Lisa, did you want to jump in?
I was just appreciating Ricardo's point, that's all.
Oh, okay. All right. Any other comments, or anybody else have anything you want to say out loud? If not, that's okay. We would love for conversation to continue in the documents. But if you have any last thoughts, we also want to just leave space for, people in the group who have reservations or are still questioning. I mean, literally, like this is a group of people from the community coming together to articulate an idea and an aspiration. So all perspectives, even negative ideas, are appreciated to help us tease out what we're trying to articulate. Okay, Claire, do you want to jump back into the next steps? And
Yep. Okay, great. So obviously you all are going to be continuing to have conversations in the document as John was just mentioning. Once that has happened, we will make sure that we capture all of the great feedback in all the different areas, through these meetings and in the document, both of the notes documents and the read ahead. and synthesize that into documentation, which will circulate to make sure that everybody has an accurate summary of the conversations that have happened. In January, early January, we'll be sending out invitations to the next listening sessions, which will be surrounding governance. So we'll have a very similar format to this format that we've had today, with following up with documentation. And then in February, listening sessions related to implementation parameters. That will lead us on to drafting call for community action, as I think was mentioned earlier in the meeting, and we'll be looking for engagement and feedback as that's kind of co-created by the conveners and any interested participants there. Once that call to action has been finalized, we will be publishing it, and at that point we'd really appreciate your involvement in making sure that's widely circulated in the wider community. So what we'll need from you, very similar things as we mentioned in the last meeting, but participation in the listening sessions. So look out for the next kind of invitations or calls to sign up for meetings for January, and shortly after for February. Please continue to comment on those, on the co-creation of those community statements and the notes documents as we've outlined. If you could just keep an eye out for deadlines, that would be great, so that we know at what point we can summarize the comments and information. Any active responses to polls or surveys that we put out, so that we can incorporate those into documentation too. Please, in conversation, advocate for the project and the conversations that we're trying to have as a community, and just your overall help in shaping COMET on an ongoing basis. Any feedback you have would be very much appreciated. Please just get in touch with me. So with that, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Happy holidays. And we really do appreciate you coming today, but also all the asynchronous comments and feedback you've been giving on documents and conversation you've been having with us and each other. So we really do appreciate that. And we look forward to Happy New Year.